So working on the auction truck again. I got the valley cover on, so that's all good. And wanted to talk about something right away. So I talked about in the old video, in the last video that I put up about this thing, that I was putting a Gen 3 pan on it. One person commented, Connor Judd, and said that the Gen 3 pan doesn't clear. He said just barely, but he said that was his experience on the 4x4 model. So my assumption when he said that was that it didn't clear the differential or like the axle, whatever. I wasn't thinking that it wasn't going to clear the cross member. So it doesn't clear the cross member. So I don't know if you can see under there, but it clears on the one side, but it just barely nicks it, just barely touches it on the passenger side. So I'm going to go through, I'm going to take this pan back off, put the Gen 4 pan back on, wallow in my sorrow, and just deal with it. So I guess I could have measured the pans, but that's my mistake for just thinking that it was going to work. But the Gen 4 pan does have a little notch right there. I didn't even realize that it does have this little dip in the pan to clear that cross member. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to block the pressure relief valve. And some of you guys were asking in the last video if you could just block this. So that's what I'm going to do. So I guess we get to see it both ways. Got a M14 by 1.5 plug. I'm going to block this thing, clean some of the dust out of this pan, and then I'm going to take the cross member off of the bottom so I can do it all from the bottom because I don't want to pull the engine back out. So probably jack the transmission up a little bit, drop that cross member down, and then just put the other pan back on. Oh well. So sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. Connor, I appreciate the comment. I should have dug into that a little bit more, but I was assuming that it was, like I said, the related to the four-wheel drive and the differential. Because like on the Ranger, the pan barely clears the 4x4 diff. So that was what I was thinking. I wasn't thinking about the cross member. So my mistake. Let's move on. All right, guys. So I got the plug in there, the M14 by 1.5 plug. I went to the store and I accidentally grabbed a M14 by 1.5 DO, the double oversized size. I didn't even realize that it said DO on it, so I had to run back and get this one. But picked this up, picked up a copper crush washer to put underneath it, and now it's on there, and I'm gonna put this thing in and then go to bed. Got everything pretty much back together as far as I know. So didn't get the cover on. I still got to do the intake, so it might read a little goofy because the math isn't actually reading anything. It's plugged in but not reading air, so that might be weird. But I think everything is good. I even got the dipstick back in there. Battery's hooked up. I'm gonna give it a start and see what it does. So I'm a little bit nervous, guys. I'm a little bit nervous. Been working on this thing for a little while, and it had a blown up engine because of a bolt that was dropped in it. And this is going to be the honest to God first start. Here's the key. This will be the first time that I ever ran this truck, because when I bought it, it had a seized engine. Well, see what happens. has good oil pressure. Over 40 psi oil pressure. But there was a noise, so I'll have to figure out what the noise was. All right, guys, it's running. It's quiet now. So what I did was let it run for a while, and I put 2 quarts of transmission fluid in the engine to kind of help loosen the lifters up. I didn't soak the lifters before I put them in. That's probably what the noise was. They weren't pumped up yet, but it still was making noise until I let the coolant temp get up to like 180, and then I revved it probably 4, 5, 6 times. I just revved until about 6,000, and then the noise went away. So I wanted to try to use the transmission fluid to loosen up the lifters if they were sticking and get some oil pressure. So it was like 60, 70 psi oil pressure when you're revving to 6,000. So that's what I did, and now it's quiet. You can see this thing, truck running, boys and girls, it's running. Let's go inside. All right, so we got oil pressure. Coolant temp is at 210 now. It's been sitting for a while. So at 1,000 RPM, about 40 psi oil pressure. This is a really low idle too, holy crap. 500 RPM idle. It's just under 40 psi oil pressure. So, let's see, like 1,500, let's see what that does. A little over 40. So that's what I did a couple times. I just took it and revved it up. And then that lifter tick went away. Alrighty, boys and girls, so it is a couple days later now, and I wanted to talk about this truck a little bit. So I have been driving it. I've been driving it for a couple days now. I took it to work. Took it to the DMV today. That was an epic fail of a trip because I brought cash. I gave my wife the card because she had something else she was doing, and I brought cash along. Didn't bring enough cash, so I ended up coming home. So gonna probably go tomorrow morning and then get it registered and get plates on it. But have been driving it. The first day I went out to drive it, a lot of you guys pointed out all of the warning lights. So it had the service stabilitrack, it had a flashing check engine light, it had an airbag light, it had like every light that you could possibly think of on. So I didn't do, at that time that I went to go drive it, I didn't do any of the computer work yet for the DOD delete. So I didn't disable the DOD, I didn't do any of that stuff, didn't disable the codes for the DOD. So it was kind of just wigged out and freaked out a little bit while I was driving. So got all that stuff done, and I can go over the file. I'll go over the file in a little bit. And it was like running okay, but then it would intermittently pop up with a random misfire and a cylinder 6 misfire code. So was messing with that a little bit, and I didn't think it was legitimate misfire, so I kind of tried to tune it out a little bit. I did a few things, but then I eventually ended up changing the coil, the wire, the plug, and took it out for a drive. Everything seemed like it was fine. The code wasn't coming back on. And then eventually it started to come back and it would show misfire, but then I got it to a point where it was showing misfires, counting misfire, but it wasn't actually enabling the check engine light for it, even though the code was active, or it was able to be active. So I took it out for a drive, basically tuned out the miss where it wasn't showing in the system, but I could feel it while I was driving. So came back home, dug into it a little bit. When I changed the coil, the wire, I did a compression check on it, and it was at like 120, which was kind of low, so I put some oil in it, and that seemed like it was okay for a little while, and then I drove it, and it came back, and the mist, like the whole truck was shaking. Came back, did another compression check on that cylinder, and it was like 20 PSI. Almost nothing. So I was a little worried about that. I even did the compression. I had the compression tester on it with the engine running, and it was only showing like 20 PSI. And then I bled the pressure off, and it didn't do anything. So took the valve cover off, and then I ended up finding a loose rocker. So the intake rocker on the number 6 cylinder was loose. So that might have been a little bit of the noise that I heard on startup. And now it's really quiet and runs really smooth, and I can actually show you guys that. All right, so I just want to show you guys kind of where I'm at with the file. So I'm going to go to open. I'm going to open a file, and then we'll go into the 2009 DoD disable PE on. That is my new file. And then I will also go to compare, and then I'm going to open a compare file, and I'll open the stock file. And we can look at the stock file before I changed it. So now we can look at the comparison. To make it simple, I'm going to go up to compare, and then I'll look at the comparison log. So this is basically going to show all of the differences here. So the only differences I have are throttle for power enrichment delay, power enrichment EQ ratio, and the DoD enable function. So I have that disabled, and then if I go into engine diagnostics and DTCs, if I scroll down here, you can see none of the ones on the right side are circled, but if I get down to here, you can see there's some that are in a green box right there. So those are the ones that are circled, and those are showing the differences, and those are all for the cylinder deactivation codes for the DoD delete. So essentially all I did with the file now, I have it completely stock. I didn't cheat it, or it's not cheated anymore with like desensitizing the misfire codes. I have the PO300 code still active, and I'll show you that one just to verify it. Random misfire detected, and that's still on. Millisecond error. So this thing is basically stock file, DoD disabled, and I have the power enrichment turned on. So that's where I'm at right now. And I'll go into the scanner, and then we'll run it and start it up. So you see it comes down nicely to a pretty low idle. It'll come down quite a bit lower too. It'll come down to like in the 500s when it's in gear. So coolant temp's at 151. It's at 650 idling. And then when I drop it into gear, it comes down and idles in like the 500s, and it's just buttery smooth. So everything looks good, feels good, no misfires coming up, and yeah, so I'm happy with this. Everything is working as it should. So no more rando lights except my seat belt. The traction control does turn on and off using the regular button here. That's what I'm doing. So no more lights. Everything is working fine. But I gotta break it to you guys. There is an oil leak that I haven't been able to figure out yet. So it's coming from the pan. The first day that I ran it, it was like gushing out of the pan on top of the like oil cooler adapter on the pan, the side of the pan, but it was coming from between the pan and the block. So like the gasket area, I went through and like tightened the crap out of all those bolts, and it stopped the gushing, but there's still quite a bit of oil that's coming out of it on the bottom. So like driver's side of the pan, whole bottom of the pan is soaked, and it's unpleasant. So that's what I'm going to continue to work on. I'll let you guys know what I find with that, but I'm probably going to end up dropping the pan again, maybe put a new gasket on it. I've never done the proper torque sequence on an oil pan before, but I might try that just to make sure that it's not me just tightening it wrong or it's misaligned or something. But it definitely sucks because it's a pretty bad leak to where I wouldn't park it in my driveway. Yeah, so like when I drove it to the DMV and I came back, DMV is like 5 miles from my house, and then I drove it back here, there's like 5 drops on the bottom of the pan and on some of the framework. So it's actually a pretty bad leak, but hopefully I'll be able to figure that out. It shouldn't be too complicated. But other than that, the truck is running good. I did put some extra fluid in it, so I'm not too worried about the fluid that leaked out. Other than that, I'm happy with it. Gonna register it tomorrow and try to fix this leak. So I won't bore you guys with that. Thanks for watching. Have a good one.